the world's writers will walk through those gates. And if you hang around, you get a chance to talk to them.
I'm interested in conversations that deal with things that matter, but real, how do we live our lives?
First of all, make climate change personal in your life. The second step is get angry and get active. And the third step, and believe it or not, I think this is the most important, we have to imagine this world that we want to hurry towards.
It's about kindness is looking at people as people and not as I voted this, I do this, whatever it is. There's some people we will never get along with, but most of us are a complex mass of different things.
My name is Rajesh Hadi. I've been participating in the Edinburgh International Book Festival for many years. The festival has been central to my development as a writer. The thrill I feel as I enter Charlotte Square has never waned. I could always count on excellent programming and stimulating discussions. There has never been a time when such meetings are more important.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Edinburgh International Book Festival event, where I am going to be talking to the very brilliant Anne Enright, author of the book Actress. Here she is indeed. Hello, Anne.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm grand, thank you. I'm here in my living room,
Lovely.
feeling the kind of odd thrill of it all. It's a thrill, and it's very strange these days.
These are strange days, and it's a pleasure to meet you, even though it's on a screen in a very two-dimensional flat way, but I'm very excited to talk to you. This brilliant book, Actress, which we're going to talk about today, but Anne's also the author of one of my absolute all-time favourite books, The Green Road, which was given to me as a gift by an actress, in fact, who said that I would love it. And Anne's also garnered many awards, which we're not going to go into, but not least of which was the Booker Prize for The Gathering. But she's also a great essayist and thinker. There are so many amazing questions and things to talk about with this book, but I wondered whether a good place to start, Anne, if you're up for this, would be if you would read us some of your lovely books.
Yes, I would. Yeah, that is a nice place to start. I'm a bit shy in front of Vicky Featherstone reading. I won't be the first person who felt a bit shy reading before Vicky, but here we go. People ask me, what was she like? And I try to figure out if they mean as a normal person. What was she like in her slippers eating toast and marmalade? Or what was she like as a mother? Or what was she like as an actress? We did not use the word star. Mostly, though, they mean, what was she like before she went crazy? As though their own mother might turn overnight, like a bottle of milk left out of the fridge, or they might themselves be secretly askew. Something happens as they talk to me. I'm used to it now. It works in them slowly, a growing wonder, as though recognizing an old flame after many years. You have her eyes, they say. People loved her. Strangers, I mean, I saw them looking at her and nodding, though they failed to hear a single word she said. And yes, I have her eyes, at least I have the same colour eyes as my mother. A hazel that in her case people like to call green. Indeed, whole paragraphs were penned about bog and field when journalists looked into my mother's eyes. And we have the same way of blinking, slow and fond, as though thinking of something very beautiful. I know this because she taught me how to do it. Think about cherry blossom, she said, drifting on the wind. And sometimes I do. Such were the gifts I got from Katherine O'Dell, star of stage and screen. How are you, O mother of mine? Never better, she used to say, and the blossoms drifted by the tree load when she looked at me. There was a man in the kitchen in Dartmouth Square, where everything important in my life seems to have happened, who knew someone who had slept with Marilyn, Marilyn Monroe, and never washed, he said. Some evening in my childhood, I came down the stairs to hear this news. He was such a nice old man. It's stained me ever since. So when people ask, what was she like? I have an urge to say, pretty clean, actually. And then to add, I mean, by the standards of the day. So that's a little amuse-bouche.
That's glorious, and it's from the beginning of the novel, and it's really kind of gets to the heart, kicks off straight away the kind of relationship, the brilliant relationship between Katherine and her daughter Norah. One of the things that I found so extraordinary and exciting about the book is that you start off teasing us that it's one thing, and it feels like it's going to be the memory.
Yeah, not every reader can cope with frustration, but actually frustration is one of my key tricks in this book and in others. When people, rock up saying, oh, we're going to find out all about Katherine O'Dell, and Norah, her daughter, says, I'm a writer, I'm going to tell you all about my mother. I'm going to write the memoir that she deserves, and that's going to show her properly. And at the end, you say, well, did that happen? And perhaps not. Is a kind of sleight of hand, and the mysterious kind of fact of Katherine the star, Katherine the mother, Katherine the actress is as fugitive and elusive as it was at the very beginning. The book is provoked by a young student who comes to the door and says, I want to write a memoir about her mother, your mother, and what was her sexual style. She's quite keen to talk about her own sexual style. And Norah, who's the daughter, is quite, quite private and a bit alarmed. I mean, of course, people are seen through a different lens and a different angle as the years pass by. But anyway, she doesn't want anyone talking about her mother's sexual style. And she says, what was she like? And she says, she was mine.
Yeah.
And that sense of possession never leaves her. And that sense of possession is often the problem in books. Loss and possession, but Norah manages to both lose and hold her mother in the same sentence, as it were.
Well, it's so interesting that because, they talk about, it starts off with the 21st birthday party, and the papers come and they take photos of the 21st birthday party, don't they? And of course, it's depicted in a certain way. And Norah talks about the fact that the story they're trying to tell is of the overshadowing mother. And she said, but we weren't like that. And I think,
yeah, and you wonder whether, people say we weren't like that. And usually when people say that, they're in a state of something like denial. So perhaps there is a protracted denial throughout the book that she isn't overshadowed, or her mother wasn't too big or too glamorous or too astonishing. So, yeah, I mean, the papers come along and she says, yes, but I know that when my mother sang that song, she comes in carrying the cake, singing Que Sera Sera, and the crowd all love it, of course, gathered there. But she says, I know she also sang For Me Alone. And I've been taken, actually, as I discussed the book after I had written it, with how gorgeous it is to formalize or ritualize love. And if there is love at the center of it all, how that holds true and how it holds good and how it kind of makes it even more gorgeous. And that's part of the meaning of glamour for me, when something both is and is larger than itself at the same time. So you get the projection and you get the truth at the center of it at the same time. It's a bit like Valentine's Day. Do you know what I mean?
Go on, why?
Well, you know, if you love someone and then you give them a flower, then, you know, then that's twice as nice.
Yeah.
Of course, you know, in adolescence or many, you know, of course, all these things are open to accusations of the fake and the fraudulent. But actors are always fake, and they're always lovely at the same time.
They are all of those things. I mean, there's so much duality in the book. That's one of the things that's so glorious about it. You know, I try desperately to keep hold of something, and you know, you tease me with the fact that she may write this book about her mother. Is she going to do that? And then she does, and she sort of finds herself as a writer through that, which I find very exciting. There's a beautiful bit, which I love at the end, when she writes the list of the books that she's written. And she says, I hear them each as a fading note. Together they make a kind of chord. And this note, which is so fugitive and beautiful, is in my head, or it is nearly in my head as I wrote them down. And, you know, there's a lot about writing in the book. We're going to talk about the theatre bit in a minute, but there's a lot about writing in the book. You know,
yeah, that's slightly ham, that moment too, you know, so fugitive. And I gotta, you know, I had a bit of a laugh.
Totally, it's glorious. And you know, so Katherine's a terrible writer. She's not successful. Norah, I feel, I'm kind of sentimental about her, becomes a good writer. I'm just interested in the journey of a writer to become a writer, and when they feel confident about saying that, and what was your journey in terms of that, Anne? Because I'm in awe of somebody who is a writer.
Oh, well, it's just a question of typing. But I'm really interested in what you say about, that Katherine was a really bad writer. And it seems to me, you know, that at the end of it, Nora's gone through her old manuscripts and she can't even look at them. They're so bad. And she can't tell which is an early. And maybe in Nora's case, she's got the mortification out with her mother. all that dread and glorious sort of shame, all that mortification that happens when you write something. You know, anything that's externalized is open to disgust, among other, I mean, lots of different emotions. Okay, so, and terror and fear and all the rest of it. So yeah, I mean, all of that roller coaster in the book is separated, that the mother has all the difficulty and Norah has all the pleasure of writing. But Norah also has a life that's a sort of answer to celebrity. She's all about the craft. She's all about the work. And Katherine, she's a star, but she's also about the craft and the work. And it is the craft and the process and the work and all of the doing that keeps her sane as long as she is, you know, that keeps her safe from fame, from, you know, fame destroys you and all the rest of it. Anyway, what happened to me? I don't know. I am not happy when I don't write. So it's just like going for a walk. I mean, you kind of think, oh, I should do it, but it's kind of hard and there's raining and, you know, you just get typing.
Wow.
So for 30 years.
You're very good at typing, if I may say so. Congratulations on it. So why theatre? I mean, you know, I feel as a theatre director, I'm always very grateful when anybody wants to write about theatre, but I was very nervous to read the book when I first started because I thought I was going to feel my own shame about theatre. And about the kind of uncovering of what theatre, or the truth of what theatre could be like. But there's a you know, you straddle, you obviously understand and know about theatre because your sort of knowledge of the journey that Katherine goes through is amazing. So why was theatre the thing, or acting?
Well, that's amazing that you say that, because theatre is the most high stakes thing that you can do, I think, because when it's bad, right? When it's bad, it's amazing. And then most of it is really quite good. And then when it's glorious, that's a whole other thing, you know. I rattled about student theatre and then a little bit with, what do you call them? Summer companies, stock companies and things like that. A great company that turned into Rough Magic Theatre Company is still working today. They were all my mates at college. And so I was going to act. Wow. And I was. Amazing. Well, I mean, not that I don't act now, but I was going to do it, you know, professionally for about 2 minutes. But even then, I kind of thought, well, I mean, even then I was running the numbers and say in those days, 1 in 9 parts was for a woman. Yeah. and 95% unemployment in the profession, you just go, well, okay, this is, I was looking at a lifetime of fail better. I mean, Beckett has nothing on any actor, go out, all that auditioning, all that failure, I hadn't got that, I didn't have it, and I'm lucky, and I didn't really necessarily like doing other people's scripts. So I did one by Carol Churchill. I do that all day and all night. This was just fantastic.
Yeah.
Top Girls. But yeah, I like the idea of writing your own stuff, actually.
Yeah. It's amazing though, because I think the sort of journey of, the kind of theatre history journey that you take us on in terms of Katherine's journey is fabulous, from that sort of actor, manager, traveling players through to the kind of success of Broadway, West End, and then the much more political theatre of the 70s and her experiences in Manchester and Edinburgh Festival, and then the very sort of alternative scene that you take her to with the
I'm really glad you're not saying, hang on a minute, 1973 Manchester, how could you do? I mean, she does do a big journey, and I was thinking, well, this is quite an interesting actress. There is a kind of bit of heightened reality involved in all of that. I had to decide early on whether she was the kind of actor that sometimes I love, who is somebody who is highly trained, who can sink into the part and who becomes the part, or is she a Siobhan McKenna type, who is, she's the old school. She's old school. She comes from melodrama. Everything is heightened. Everything is slightly mannered. The way she phrases, the slight sibilance, and as she gets older, her voice becomes a national sort of lullaby. She becomes more and more iconically Irish. And in order to do that, she isn't going to be a method sort of. I mean, she takes acting classes in New York, but she wasn't going to be method. She was going to be big, and she was going to be up. Her gaze is always up. Yeah. That picture of Joan of Arc, Siobhan McKenna as Joan of Arc, Siobhan McKenna in Ballygon Goira, her last role, John Murphy's play with the Druid. That was major for me. The whole redheadedness of all of that. There was, it was very, very, very important. So, but when I was half involved or semi-involved in theatre, I did see things. I mean, I remember when Waking the Feminists started in Ireland in 2016, when the women who had been excluded from the Abbey Theatre's programme for that year stood up and said, well, why is the commemorative year of the 1916 Rising, why are there no women writers? And in the wake of that, a lot of women spoke about theatre. One of them was Polish. I was on a stage with her. She said, you have no idea what happens to women in Polish theatre. They are dragged around the stage by their hair on a regular basis. And this is seen as a complex annoyance of the government of the day. So what we do is we abuse women and they stand in for humankind. But you remember that also from the plays of the, what we used to call the Barker Brenton Bonds, that abusing actors on stage in a pretend way was seen as a political critique. Yeah. So that was great. So I thought, yeah, I'll do a bit of that actually. Yeah. I had Joan O'Hara in my head, Sebastian Barry's wonderful mother. Yeah, was an actress, the Abbey actress, and she briefly worked with a Polish director called Maciek. But at one stage, all these very strange things were going on stage, and she emptied a bag of sugar on her head. Go, Joan! It was so amazing, and the things that women are obliged to do in fictions, and the fictions of others, usually men, are an absolute key thing to the cycle of roles that Katherine has. Yeah. So she's in one second-hand fiction after another. She's the girl in a nightie. She's the running nun. And I had a lot of fun with all of those different characters and different roles. But the slow accretion of one or other second-hand fiction is why she desperately wants to be a writer and write her own stuff and get a decent role going. And I just loved shifting each iteration of that kind of madness was great. The way women are obliged to act out, and we do it in our daily lives as well, women and men both, but particularly women, we act out some or other secondhand fiction. Some are other cliche.
Entirely. I mean, I thought that was one of the things that I really loved about these, which I had to look up because, you know, you're so convincing. I didn't know whether or not they were actually real plays or not that they were in, that she was in. But of course,
had too much fun.
Yeah, you had. It was so much fun.
Yeah,
it's so skillfully done as you move through it, and of course, you know, she's desperately trying to find to be the center of her own narrative, and of course as a star she's not. And it's just so interesting for me about how the novel starts unpacking that in terms of the roles that she plays, and Norah's trying to put Katherine at the center of their story and understand her more and research her. But then Norah, brilliantly, with her cool mind and quietness, becomes the absolute center of it. So you play such a brilliant magical trick on us for making us really realize and understand the lack of roles for women, the lack of centering of women in their own story. And then the whole novel becomes about that until she, you know, is generous.
Yeah, it's not really stated as that. I'm delighted that you see it and that readers actually see it, but it's not stated as a kind of ideological theme of the thing, of you know, being in the wrong story. You could call it The Wrong Story. The Wrong Story by Anne Enright. That's my next book. Right there. But yeah, anyway, by the middle of the book, I mean, Norah basically eats her mother. She takes over. I was very interested in memoirs to say that by the end of the book, they loathe and hate their subject.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen in this, partly because of the Oedipal crux that happens in the middle of the book, where Nora's own autonomy becomes, you know, central. So I mean, that's the story of mothers and daughters. It turns. So that moment of turning, for Norah, for Norah, is when she goes off and starts having boyfriends and having a great time, and she goes, "Oh, this is a bizarreries. Okay, this is now me."
Yeah.
And her mother's bereft.
Yes.
Overtaken, abandoned.
Yeah.
Thrown away. But yeah, all of that.
Very sad. But that brings us to one of the brilliant themes of sexuality, which runs through it so strongly, female desire. You know, it really surprised me that Norah was so set. Well, not so set, but the fact of how she lost her virginity, about the joyfulness she feels.
Oh, she was delighted about it all. Yeah, no, I've read so many accounts of sex that make it seem like it's the worst thing that anyone could do to another human being, or with another human being. And so I said, well, I mean, you know, something's wrong. I mean, why are we all here if that's the case? But no, I did want to reset it. And I've always wanted to write about female sexuality in particular, from highly subjectivizing it as much as possible. We're really interested in agency, both, you know, not just sexual agency, but agency in general, female doing things. I mean, we're so much the objects of stuff. So doing things, being things, wanting things, and including wanting sex, which is the taboo. That is the taboo.
Completely.
That somehow, if women want sex, some disaster. What is the disaster? I don't know what the disaster is. Social disaster, that is, the political disaster, whatever. Anyway, so, I mean, I exaggerate for the purposes of argument, but that is a very serious taboo, because, of course, perhaps because it's so empowering. Wanting and having is like, that is your cake and eating it too. Anyway, this is what Norah discovers. Oh, that's what it was all about.
Yeah.
So that's the way she starts off. She goes, oh, this is what people haven't been telling. This is why it's such a big business. Why, you know, everyone's all so keen on it. So it's a great realization for her. And I needed to do that partly in order to restore or to ensure her agency as a female character, but also because there are different kinds of sex in the book. Sex is not just one thing. Mm. So in order to show, and she doesn't quite, it's really hard for her to understand in the 1970s what bad sex might be, what the kind of as yet unarticulated issues of consent might be, what a bad date might be. And she thinks at one stage, maybe this is how it's supposed to be. so I needed her to have a really good, clear idea of what the metaphysical poets got from love. You know, my face in thine eye, thine in mine appear, or whatever that is, that mutuality and equality of desire that you get in John Donne. That's where I came from in my sad little life.
Oh my goodness me, do you know something? If I should hold this up to prove this to you, because one of the things I found really sort of moving about it is also the sort of journey that she goes on with her husband.
Oh yeah.
And the kind of, and the very sort of fierce sexual togetherness of what that is and what that means, and the words that you used, like pivot and crux.
Oh yeah.
Around you, inside me. And I was like, I did John Donne for my A-level English literature, and I was like, it's the twin compasses.
Oh yeah.
And that, so it's so metaphysical. I really felt that. The kind of
good. Yeah, that's great, because some people might think it was a bit underwritten. I didn't want to, you know, the Norah is married for 25 years or something. And that to me is a bit of a closed box. I mean, I haven't read that written about. So that's really interesting. What's the taboo there? And so, but I did underplay the sex in that relationship. I kind of thought, well, okay, then, you know, give them a bit of privacy, whatever it is. So yeah, it was quite stylized or quite metaphysical. That's a great compliment, actually.
No, I really felt it. I mean, I felt it deep inside me. It was a really strong, powerful thing. It felt really exciting. Kind of erotic, but not detailed. It was brilliant. Really, really brilliant.
And abstract.
Yeah, abstract, which is extraordinary. On the other hand, of course, there's the sort of the men and their attitudes in the book to sex and sexuality, which is so complex.
Yeah, I mean, you get characters that are highly recognizable, but actually there's a range of men in the book, and they have a range of wants and issues and problems and attitudes to all of that. But yeah, now there are two bad men in the book, and one of the bad men, who isn't that bad really at all, gets shot by by Katherine in the foot.
Yeah.
And the other bad man is particularly unpleasant to Norah in her youth. So. Well, your question was what they want or whatever. I mean, actually,
one of the things that I was thinking, well, it's interesting the way we go through the structure of the book, which is that I felt for a long time that we were looking at the kind of violence towards women, or the grooming of women, all of those, the coercion and the lack of consent and all those things, as a sign of the times, and we were accepting it, which is what has happened in the past. And then, of course, when we get to the end, which we mustn't give away, must be to the audience, in terms of what Norah finds out about her father and about her kind of paternity, you sort of realise that actually we should never have accepted any of that as a sign of the times. And I thought that sort of the notion of the brushing it under the carpet, which is what's happened up to now, and then the real violence of what happens if you allow that upon somebody's life to take place, I thought was really brilliantly handled. I was wondering about Duggan and Boyd, though, the two men that you were talking about what they want from Norah. I'm really interested in that, about what they want from Norah.
Yeah, or what they want from Katherine O'Dell.
Or Katherine, exactly.
Yeah, because at one stage, she says what they want is her talent, or what they want to spoil is her talent. That's what they envy. So it's kind of a narcissistic universe, for better or for worse. And envy is a great narcissist's emotion. So these men are quite full of themselves one way or the other. They think of themselves as important men, thinking men. And what they envy is the pure fluency of Katherine O'Dell's talent, her ardency, her ability to flame and give, and to be somehow sacrificed for the audience's greater spiritual advancement or whatever, you know. So I ran out of that sentence there. I was just thinking, what do you think happens on stage? What do you think happens on stage, Vicky? But anyway, is sacrifice what we want?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I the thing about the happen on stage thing, I really love the stuff about, you know, the audience will always stay there. It's a safe place to be, which I'm like, it's not. it feels like quite terrifying. It can feel quite terrifying for people.
I'm so amazed that people, or I was always so amazed, and quite madly, at one stage when my friends were up on stage and I was in the audience and I didn't know why, I had a brief moment of saying, well, why am I, well, there they all are. I could stand up and walk on stage.
Yeah.
The thing that no one ever does. I mean, well, unless they're very unwell. It's really not usual.
No, I mean, it is weird, isn't it? I mean, that really fascinates me, the thing about theatre. I mean, you talk about this a lot. There's a lot of liminal spaces in your book, things that are literally described, like, you know, Katherine fear of walking out of the darkness into the light and the falling, and then the forgetting. But there's also ones which aren't literally described, that are lots of different spaces between the real and the unreal. And I'm fascinated always in theatre, and you talk about it, the gap, when you open your mouth and a word comes out. This idea that something happens on stage, there is a literal gap, and then there is an audience. And in the gap, we have some form of understanding. It's like a metaphor from one thing to another, and we understand. I don't know how that works, and I'm really interested in how things become three-dimensional in novels, because that's a three-dimensional relationship. And how do you do that? Because it is three-dimensional. It doesn't exist as a series of pictures in my mind. It is real. How does that work in fiction?
Mind the gap. Mind the gap. I mean, she does describe Katherine walking out on stage, and I didn't write it in the book, but I do think it's a moment of being born, you know?
Wow, yeah.
I do think it's a dream of being born, one way or the other, of coming. I mean, there is a couple of birth scenes in the book, but and that's what it is when we step out on stage. The thing about a book is that it happens between two people, the writer and the reader, and it happens on the page. So instead of the emptiness of the prose art, we have the flat surface of the page. But so there's an object in the middle, a mediating object. That's actually, I've just said something very abstract, that's possibly pants, because it's so intimate.
Yeah.
I don't know how words make people all think differently. So I don't know how consciousness is informed by language, but I know when it's working. I know when it's happening for me, and how we are in a book and in a sentence. There's something in this book, I suppose, of the voice, and that is one of my my tricks, is that you're listening to someone. What I'm interested in is the distance from the reader's ear to the narrator's speech you are. So you're listening to something. Are you listening like you're on the phone, which could be very strange and uncanny? Are you listening, as you know, to someone at the bus stop? What style are they in your head? Are you talking to them in your head actually, and not listening to them at all? It's, you know, so it's the closeness of the voice that interests me, the buzz of intimacy of the voice against your brain, basically.
So exciting, isn't it, that notion? Because of course what happens with this story is that Norah she feels so personal to me. She so reveals herself to herself, and she's so unexpected as she finds some kind of happiness, and she has her gorgeous kids, and, you know, we learn about them when she looks for the ring and everything. But I never thought I was going to find that Norah.
Right.
Norah. So as I meet her, she becomes so personal and close to me. Whereas at the same time, you are doing the Siobhan McKenna thing with Katherine, where she's kind of declamatory and red-headed and lit.
Yes. Yeah, but I mean, there's a huge amount of backstage. Because the important thing for Norah is going backstage with Katherine and seeing all that madness, which I love still, the dark space of backstage. But another liminal space is sleep. There's a chapter, I like when the book does something that I didn't plan, or I don't really know how to fit in, but it's kind of right. And one of them is where we meet Nora's husband. He's asleep, and she wakes up, she thinks he's dead. And she thinks, oh, great, he's dead. And then goes, oh my God, that was a dream, and how terrible I am. But there he is. It's actually quite a trope now in modernist fiction by women, the sleeping man. And what that is. That you know, so we don't really get a naturalistic evocation of the marriage. And when the emotion of the book builds up enough that she can tell us what the important, you know, what this important history for her, it's all done by modification and change. So there's never a moment where you can grasp this person is that now. That person is essentially him. There he is.
Yeah.
Shifts all the time. He
doesn't have a name, does he?
No.
No, cool. I was just thinking whether I'd missed that in a really foolish way, but no, he doesn't have a name.
No, he's a modernist character.
But what's, of course, so fascinating when you talk about voice and the different voices is that the only kind of agency he has, apart from being at the other half of a great sex life and the father of the children, all those things, is the act of giving the tape and the cassette recorder to rehear her mother's voice. Which she obviously doesn't put in the cassette recorder. She has to save it and leave it. So that's kind of extraordinary as well. That it kind of
nice
moment. Amazing. Yeah. In terms of the voice, you've talked about this before as well, but I was really fascinated in Katherine's journey to Irishness, which, you know, and the way you talk about her accent going from, you know,
just a bottle of dye. It's not a journey. It's just a trip to the salon. Yeah.
Think about her accent as well, where it goes from fake to symbolic to ordinary.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, she turned into a kind of quite someone who speaks a little bit like I would, a South County Dublin accent.
Yeah. Journey to Irishness and what you feel about that, the kind of nationalist desire of us all to be Irish.
Speaking of liminal spaces, I do love the place that exists before things are named. Mm-hmm. So one of those spaces was Ireland before it became Ireland, for example. So the journeys of English, Scottish, British actors over and back to Dublin, around the countryside in Ireland, and the Irish actors on the London stage was very kind of usual. That's what they did. It was the circuit. It was kind of, you know, so these mongrel players who travel around and who really don't have a place. She grew up among them with the fit-ups in the 1940s and 50s. She's as Irish as anyone who ever played football, but she was born on the Irish team, but she was born in England. So I love this pre-identity stuff. Mm-hmm. And when the identity starts kicking in and Irishness becomes more of a brand, you might say, she goes, oh yeah, that's a good brand. not as cynically as that, but she thinks, oh yes, no, I'm poetic, I'm lyrical, I'm passionate, I have heart, I must be Irish. Or, yeah, I'm an artist, you know. So it is a kind of a grand lie that she finds useful. And of course, she goes through various iterations of Irishness that become increasingly crass. Mm-hmm. I think one of the great successes of the Irish tourist board in the 60s and 70s was selling Ireland back to itself. And yeah, so instead of thinking, oh God, the west of Ireland is so poor and I have to run out of it in case there's another famine, we thought the west of Ireland is so lovely. Well, no, I mean, that's far too complicated. I'm not going to say anything. I love the west of Ireland. And but, you know, what had been a complex and poverty-based difficult history became more and more postcard friendly.
Yeah. And I sort of wonder within that whether there is an inevitability that Katherine, in that search to be the most Irish, ends up having a support for and a kind of relationship with somebody who you allude to being in the IRA. I find the politics of that really interesting.
Yes, and that's, you know, there are real figures, you know, kind of secret histories involved in that aspect of the research. And yeah, no, Katherine becomes involved with someone who may or may not become a leading figure in the IRA. And I was really, I had to balance it with great care, because you look at the civil rights movement of the 1960s and Bloody Sunday, the burning of the British Embassy, these really huge moments in my own personal history, and how long it took for us to be able to even write about these things.
Yeah.
One of the first times I was ever in the theatre was in the Royal Court in 1980. Carol Churchill's play Cloud Nine.
Yeah.
And in the middle of it walked the ghost of a character's sister. And he had been shot. He was a soldier, a squaddy who had been killed in Northern Ireland. And I have never felt a taboo more shocking and amazing. I literally was out of my seat at the idea that this was manifest on the stage, this incredibly difficult historical kind of moment. Anyway, so I approached it with great caution. I was really interested in the difference between fantasy and reality. I'm really interested in the difference between the story and how we go about our daily life. And I'm really interested in the difference between thinking about shagging somebody or killing them and actually shagging them or killing them. And it is the only difference there is, really. I mean, it's absolute. Yeah. So Katherine is involved with a bad man, or someone who becomes a bad man. And Norah says, but we're all attracted to them, aren't we, really? We're all interested in the shadow. And actually, so many of our stories and fictions are about the shadow. It's a huge difference to see it walking around in your life, I think.
Wow, yeah. And it's the thing I think as well that is so interesting with how you place Norah in that is when she says something about, in this instance, it was just too real for me. You talk about real and not real a lot. But actually, I think that that's the thing for me, which walks the tightrope so elegantly, of Katherine's sort of obsession or interest in the violence and the brutality of that man.
Well, actually, both of those things happen in the body. And so Norah is the witness to a bombing in Dublin, which has not been resolved, who did it in the 1970s. And the difference is that these fantasies, when they are acted out, play out in the destruction of the bodies of strangers. Mm-hmm. So whether the fantasy is sexual or murderous, it plays out in the flesh of others. And I think that's the most radical and amazing thing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, I'd love to write only about empathy or only about how we think about each other, but these are really radical physical acts, and they are, totally to do with our integrity and existence as human animals.
Yeah, the violence on the body, of who perpetuates that and what those are is a massive conversation of now.
Yeah, but you look at Netflix on any Tuesday night, and that's all there is. Is the vibe, do you know what I mean? Is one or other kind of potential dismemberment, maybe.
Yeah. It's our greatest fear and our most violent act forward, isn't it? All of those things. I just wanted to ask you about, before we go for some questions, but I've got some questions coming in here, about structure and how you draft and how you develop ideas, because obviously I work not obviously to everyone else, obviously to myself, I work in new writing and I work with playwrights all the time, and there's a major process that goes on about the drafting and the restructuring. I'm just interested in how that works for you as an author.
Well, I don't have you to work with. so more arduously. No, I mean, the structure of the book is pretty much, I was thinking about it earlier, the structure is, or all my structures are pretty standard, right? There's a midpoint. There's a climactic point, there's a triggering action. There are all the things that the guys or the people who write playwriting or screenwriting books advocate. It's a Shakespearean structure or a 3-act structure. It is a kind of natural kind of wave shape that we all know somehow, very organic. And then I mess around with it, So I just structure it as an emotional journey. And then I see what else might fit at that moment. And the things that fit work by juxtaposition as well as development. Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of modernist impulse of putting things beside each other. That's a kind of anti-time. And then there's a really temporal kind of naturalistic push forward. And those two tensions. I mean, God knows I wish I was just one or the other thing. But I love working between tensions, because it gives, or between contradictions, because it gives the energy that I want to sit down, that's why I sit down.
I mean,
figuring this out,
I would hate it if it was only one thing or the other, because that's exactly where, as we were saying, the gap, that's where the tension was between the things, which is so exciting. But when you have an idea, I mean, I'm sure it's different every time, so this is a really sort of crass question, so I apologise, but when you have an idea, do you sort of feel and know the whole idea, or does it reveal itself as you start writing?
I don't really have an idea. I have a problem, maybe. I have, a problem. What was she like?
What was she like? Is that the problem of this book?
Yeah, and actually the problem is usually stated on the first gesture, the first writing gesture. So I will look at it to see what the problem is. So I tell my students, I teach in UCD, and I tell my students all the time that it's already, they've already written it somehow. It's already in the first thing that they've written. So you have to look at it very carefully to see what contradictions are already at play, that then you're going to expand out over this series of 80,000 words. Easy. That's what's
extraordinary, though, about the visceral relationship as the reader, because you go on a kind of wave-like journey as you discover those things, and that's the thing that it goes deep into.
Yeah, the readers are all different. I mean, as I mentioned right at the top of this, some readers can't stand frustration. Some readers, the wantiness of the reader, and the wantiness of me at a book, is kind of interesting, and they get very stroppy then if they're given the wrong thing. And so what I'm trying to do, or what works for me, is if the language holds something aesthetically, I mean, as it were, in tension, in stasis, and whatever. If the language holds, then you'll keep them.
Yes.
But it has to be. That's all about tone and emotion and all the rest of it. And no, I'm not gonna give them what they want. No. Don't buy this book. You will not get what you want.
But you could also buy the book. Get what you want. There's a button, isn't there, to click to buy the book, which would be a wonderful thing for Anne and for her publisher, but also for the book festival, buying it from here, because it supports the book festival being able to go forward in these uncertain times. We should move on to some questions from other people. Now, we've talked about the other readers, not just me selfishly. So here's one from Claire. And she said, you've said before that you like exploring topics that are barely spoken or taboo. Can you tell us what topic in society deserves an Anne Enright airing?
Well, I mean, there are lots, and I do think that fiction is necessary because it is safe, or seems safe. It's better than fighting in the street. And what topics do I feel? That's a really interesting question. And as the taboos break and shift, what are the new ones? Well, I'm not going to tell you. I'm writing away now at the minute, but I don't know if I've necessarily found that nerve yet, but I'm working. I'm actually quite an old-fashioned story.
The thing I always find interesting about taboos when writers break them is that you didn't know they needed breaking. That's what writers are shaman to do that for us. They go, oh God, that was what we needed.
Yeah, but I mean, early on, I used to go around thinking that everybody knew what was really obvious, but it's the obvious thing that can't be said. So so you wait for something to become so obvious that saying it is inevitable. I suppose, if you're lucky, if you catch that,
Here's another one from Kirsty. She says, how does being Irish affect your worldview and your writing in the process?
I'm on a bit of a journey now because Irishness for me was so exclusionary of female creativity, or so iconized it in such a way that I found damaging, or it was such a that I wasn't very keen on it for a long time. I think nationalisms tend male, and I was very cautious of nationalism. Because of its right-wing tendencies, I suppose, even though Ireland hasn't gone to the right wing. Now in COVID times, you can think, well, how we organize ourselves in borders and tribes is really quite, quite ancient, maybe, or useful again. Anyway, how does it inform my worldview? I'm beginning to think that Irish people are quite nice.
I think so.
And that's not a bad thing to be.
No.
It's not necessarily, I don't know, imperialistic or something. It doesn't, I don't know. What does it get you? But it's better than not being nice, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Ireland is one of those countries, we talked about this with Katherine, but Ireland is one of those countries that so many people wish that they were from. And
yeah,
it's really fascinating about how
yeah, no, I mean, they're welcome to, a lot of growing up without contraception, divorce or abortion facilities, being taught by on Catholic grounds by Catholic priests and nuns, come on in, the water's just fine. Yeah. I mean, it is, I think, quite a crucible and it doesn't get fun until it's kind of terrible one way or the other.
Really?
Well, I'm not worried about, yeah, I mean, I don't know. These are huge questions, and it's really interesting that we talk about it a lot in the newspapers and all our platforms now, what one nationality or another means. And for a long time I was like, what the hell? I wish I could not be Irish. But now I'm fine. I mean, I can't be anything else. Why is it the one identity that you can't shift?
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. We were just talking about this briefly before, weren't we? That they're about the sort of borders and fluidity and where they've come from and what that means in terms of your own identity or countries. And, obviously in England, we're going through a major crisis in terms of...
Yes. But I think you need a sense of circumference as a writer, and that's what your tradition, but you also make your tradition. So every individual writer in, London or Aberdeen or wherever they are will form their own tradition and say, this is the yada yada, and claim the authority to make the tradition into which they can write. Mm-hmm. So it's self-made as well as publicly, communally formed, I think.
Right. Here's one from Elizabeth, who says, was Katherine's character inspired by someone in particular?
Her characterizations were inspired by certainly Siobhan McKenna. And if I look at the very early bits of writing the book, there was one evening I was reading Maeve Brennan, who is an Irish writer who worked in the New Yorker and became psychotic in her later life. And was quite a glamorous Irish person. And she went to interview Siobhan McKenna in 1955, and there was a New Yorker on the town piece between the two. And I thought, well, that's so interesting, this talented, potentially psychotic, mad Irish woman, and a kind of glorious, mad portraying Irish woman. And madness in general was in the air. So those two women went into it very much, but there's loads more. I mean, I know I'm cooking when it's like everyone,
Yeah. And those extraordinary, Katherine's such an extraordinary character, isn't she? In terms of in every single way, I don't think it could just be based on a single person. She has so.
Oh no, and that's that sits down on you if you can't steal like that.
No.
Because it kills the fiction.
Yeah. This is an interesting question. What did you hope yourself to achieve through this book, and did you achieve it for yourself?
I'm just looking for peace of mind. I'm just looking for peace of mind. What did I want to achieve? Yeah, I mean, every book has about three different things you wanted to do. I wanted to write a book that the friends of my college years would recognize and take as a gift, I think. I wanted to write a book that people who love theatre would love. Not to sound too sentimental, but I wanted to represent that somehow and hand it back, shape it and hand it back. I mean, the glamour and the tawdriness of the theatre have always caught me. I've always wanted to do it, and it just seemed too tawdry, too glamorous to do. And I wanted to catch that. I wanted to catch that emotion somehow.
I think you've done that hugely, and I felt so strongly as well. This thing about people who work in theatre, it's such a sort of life experience for them. They never want it to end. And I really, you know, that kind of, you know, you write about it beautifully, but the kind of carrying on, people turning up at the house, you know, late into the night, and songs and everything carrying on. There's just something, isn't there, about trying to keep hold.
Yeah.
This moment in some way, and the community of it, and that's obviously something which is now we don't have, but yeah.
I mean, I think people who aren't in the theatre or aren't around actors look at stars and think of them as solo human beings, but actually theatre practitioners know that it's a mad communal thing, that people are together for 6 weeks or 3 months, and they love each other absolutely, and then they don't see each other until they're cast again but the intensity of that in the rehearsal room and improvisation room and all that it's like being drunk all the time. It's like being in love all the time, and it's very lovely. It's quite, I don't know, do you agree with me or not, Vicky? I mean, you do it for, you know.
I mean, I agree with you entirely. It's an extraordinary thing, and actually not having done it now since March, and like all the conversations that I have are about the strategy and about how we survive. But actually, it's all the worst bits of being an artistic director at the moment. None of the best bits, which are the community and the amazing people at all levels doing all the different jobs, you know. And
but also, not just that it's communal, but it's physical, it's visceral, it's a very, you know, I was going to say, it's very altogether kind of thing. It's very not holistic or Gesamtkunstwerk or whatever. Anyway, it's something that's all together and not compartmentalized at all. It's really an amazing world. I didn't even scratch the surface of it, really.
But you got well, I mean, who can really, because it's like enormous. But you know, what you really made me feel was her joy, fear, kind of experience of the performance, and the performance is the thing. You know, we were talking about that. It's so weird, isn't it, in a way, because we're not here with the audience.
Yeah, and the fact that you're not making up the words, but that the words are somehow stored and they come out anyway, that you are a vessel. That's kind of amazing too.
Do you know that they did this amazing experiment with Fiona Shaw, where they put things on her head, a neurologist, and then she had to recite "Not I," the brilliant Beckett monologue. And what they found was that she was using a part of her brain that nobody uses, so that actors store that.
Maybe that's only Fiona Shaw. I mean, maybe that's only Fiona Shaw. Maybe it's like, you know, the rest of us, we don't know.
We don't know, but it's amazing that they use it.
It's amazing. Is it like for singing, you know, maybe the bit for singing?
Yeah. It's really fascinating.
Oh, you do it. I did the Hellfire sermon from Portrait of the Artist 100 times for lunchtime theatre, and on the Monday I couldn't remember any of it.
I know.
I mean, where is it? It's in there. I'll be 90, I hope, clutching the nurse's hand, and I'll be going, now, and tell you about how it'll all come out.
Do you remember what you write, though? Do you remember what you write, or do you have to look back at it, or is it in you?
I've never been able to just recite. I have to have the visual. And so, I mean, I look back at what I did 20 years ago and I say, oh, wow, what? I used to be able to write. Why can't I write anymore? And that happens all the time. Thank God. Well, you know, because there's so much refining that goes on. But your former work is always intriguing. Intriguing. Who wrote that?
I can imagine. Do you hold on to the language though? Because the language is really wrought. Do you hold on to the language? I said, because the language is so beautifully shaped and wrought in your writing. And I just wonder whether I'm
more discarded than hold on. Yeah, no, I'm never going to use the word fugitive again. It cropped up twice, first in speech, and then in that little piece you read. I'm never going to use that again. So I'm always divesting. Did
I help by bad reading, you see?
Well, no, I said fugitive first, and it's already a bit law, isn't it? Fugitive. Anyway. So yeah, no, cadences. It's all about the cadence for me, and then I get a bit bored with the cadence, and I want to shake it up. So, I don't know. It's great. It's a great lot. It's great pleasure in the day when you're working.
Yeah. Well, we're reaching an end, and I should congratulate you hugely on this beautiful book and your other writing as well. But also, it's been an absolute pleasure.
What a high point. Well, for me, thanks so much, Vicky.
Oh, well, congratulations. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we'll wait for 8.